Hello, welcome to the Story Wheel. And it is Autumn Equinox. I'm so pleased because it's actually pouring with rain outside. And it has been a horrendously dry summer. We've got no grass in the paddocks, and I'm very glad that it's raining. So hopefully we'll have a good start to autumn. And yes, we are here for the Autumn Equinox story on the Story Wheel. And autumn is a liminal time, the beginning of autumn, that autumn equinox time, liminal space. And it only happens twice a year. And the daylight and nighttime hours are equal. And I'm kind of encouraged that not even Mother Earth can stay in balance for very long. That makes me feel a lot better about my own sort of feeble efforts at life balance. And it also helps me to remember that it was never about balance, but about flow and change. So, this is a well-known myth, which I'm sure you will actually all know. It's from the Greek pantheon, and it has many purposes, only one of which is to explain how Mother Earth came to have her first autumn in the creation of the seasons. But it's a much deeper myth than that. And it's got a lot to say about mother-daughter connections and the dynastic relationships that were culturally important in ancient Greece. So in a time when women were seen as chattels, able to be used as a bartering tool, to say that this story is just about seasonality is to actually do it a great disservice. And as we go along, I hope you'll be able to get a flavour of what it might have been like to have been a woman in the days when power was solely in the hands of men, as it is in so many places still. And even in the story, Demeter, the mother goddess, she's initially powerless in the face of the male gods around her and what they decide. And it's only through her mother's grief and rage that she comes to realise that she's got power to generate massive change, not only in her own and her daughter's outcomes, but also in the very ebb and flow of the natural world. So let's begin. The story of Demeter, Persephone and Hades, also known as Persephone's descent into the underworld, or the abduction of Persephone. So first, it's helpful to let's note some crazy family dynamics in the story. First of all, we've got Zeus, the god of the sky, the god of the thunder, the father of all the Olympians, and he was an all-round philandering creep, actually. He was married officially to Hera, who was also his sister. And he was the lover of Demeter, who was also his sister. And he was brother to Hades, god of the underworld, who was married to no one. I mean, who would want to marry the god of the dead? Live underground all year round? No thanks. With only dead people and the giant three-headed hellhound Cerberus for company. Yeah, Hades wasn't exactly the catch. And so Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, the earth's fertility and the crops, in her affair with Zeus, she had had a child who she called Persephone. Now, Persephone was absolutely stunning, absolutely radiant. Think 1960s, 1970s flower child. Being of purely godly descent meant that wherever she walked on the earth, flowers would literally bloom in her footsteps. And she loved the light and the warmth and taking long, lazy, summered walks and amongst all the flowers and the wildflower meadows. And that's just as well, really, because back in those days, light and warmth was all there was, because summer was the only season. Summer, summer, summer. And Demeter would ensure that continuous growth provided all the food that the gods and the mortals needed to keep them satisfied. So day upon day, well, it would dawn clear and bright, with Persephone marvelling at the beauty of the many flowers her mother designed just for her joy and amusement. But whilst summer ruled on earth, downstairs, it was a different matter altogether. Damp, dark and dismal, well, that would be bad enough. But with the inclusion of shades everywhere, shades is like a polite word for spirits of the dead that the ancient Greeks used. Well, down there, it was pretty depressing. And Hades, well, he had a hankering for a little lightness in his life. Or should that be in his death? And so it was that one day he'd had enough. And he decided to take a look at what was going on above ground. So he got out his big black chariot with his big black horses, and he surreptitiously circled the earth, and then he went to visit his brother Zeus on Mount Olympus. Truth be told, Zeus, well, he barely tolerated Hades. Hades, whose permanent state of misery was something of a downer. And when the king of Tartarus, so Tartarus is the everlasting abyss of darkness under the underworld, well, when he arrived moaning about his lonely existence, Zeus impatiently suggested that his brother take the initiative. Go and find yourself a wife. Surely, said Zeus, surely there must be some woman on earth who'd be willing to marry you. Well, Hades scowled gloomily, and whilst doubting this, he did indeed set off to circle the plains below Olympus to see what he could see. And what he saw made his black eyes stand out on stalks. Because there, pirouetting in a field of poppies and goldenrod and cornflowers and cosmos, was the most breathtaking creature Hades could have imagined. Garlands of daisies were draped through her golden hair, and birds fluttered around her in a joyful chorus of exultation. Imagine Disney princess. And Hades, he was instantly smitten. But it wasn't lost on him that he was hardly likely to appeal to this radiant being, so he turned his chariot back to Olympus, and entering his brother's throne room again, he asked Zeus, "What should I do?" Radiant being. Daisies in her hair, chorus of birds. Oh, that'll be Persephone. Persephone. Well, if you want to marry her, you're just going to have to kidnap her. It's the only way. Her mother Demeter. Yeah, Demeter. Yeah, our sister. Yes, Hades. That does make Persephone your niece. And, well, no, Demeter is not going to agree to that match, I can tell you. You're just going to have to do a bit of abducting. That's all there is to it. Ooh, now, the horror of this will not be lost on you. So let's recap. We've got Zeus. Persephone's father has just suggested to his brother that he abduct Zeus's own daughter and whisk her away to the underworld to be that brother's wife. Very unpleasant, to say the least. But unfortunately, this is how the immortals behaved over and over again. And so it came to be that the very next day, when Persephone was picking flowers for her latest headdress, that rotten Zeus, he zapped a very small lightning bolt down to earth, where it landed, and a particularly beautiful new flower, never seen before, sprang up. And Persephone, drawn to it and bending low, well, she went to pick it up. But as she did, the earth below that very spot, it started to shudder and heave, and then to crack and open, and a monstrous black chariot with a hooded figure reached down and snatched up that young, unsuspecting woman into his clutches. As you can imagine, Persephone screamed and she fought, all to no avail. And her last piercing cries carried as far as the cave of the old witch Hecate, who snapped up her head, blind eyes showing, white and terrified, knowing that some hideous crime had been committed and not able to see what it was. And then silence. Nothing but the settling of the dark earth over the hole where the chariot had descended into the pits of hell. Poor Persephone. poor Demeter. And that evening, when Persephone didn't come home, she called and called for her daughter. Long into the night she searched, long into the night and into the dawn and all the next day, with a fear gripping her, with a certainty that some immortal tragedy had befallen her beautiful girl. And so Demeter, she sought out the blind crone to help her, and together witch Hecate and Demeter lit Hecate's magical torches, and they set out to scour every corner of the earth, shining the all-seeing light of the flames into every crevice, every high place and every low, everywhere. And yet nowhere did they find Persephone. It was clear she was no longer in the world above ground. And Demeter's sorrow grew and grew, and she cloaked herself in black and hunched her body around her mother's pain and let it seep into the land and the plants, into all life, which she abandoned, not caring if the flowers wilted or died, or if the leaves fell and the trees went into mourning beside her. She didn't care. It could all die. Nothing mattered to her anymore. And as she mourned, and the earth went into this first fallow period, the first it had ever experienced, the mortals, they set up a wailing that carried all the way up the slopes to Mount Olympus, because of course, with no summer and no warmth and the plants all wilting away, there was nothing to eat, nothing to keep them warm. What were they to do? What were they to do apart from to call out to the gods to save them? Now, while all this was going on, Zeus sat there on his throne, blocking his immortal ears. If he heard one more whining lamentation from those blasted mortals, he'd send down 1,000 thunderbolts and put the whole lot of them out of their misery. However, this did not just affect Zeus. No way, no. The mortals were not just whinging. They were starting to die, and in quite large numbers. And if this carried on, there would be no more mortals left to worship the gods. And what is a god with no one setting up songs of praise and making fragrant sacrifices? No, indeed, it was not looking good for the gods. Oh, what to do? What to do? Where's my messenger? Zeus yelled. Hermes, get on your winged sandals and go and bring Demeter to me. This has got to stop. So, still tearing her hair and ripping at her clothes and keening with sorrow, Demeter arrived sobbing in Zeus's throne room. For all the gods' sake, Demeter, get a grip, said Zeus. What on earth is wrong with you? Why are you letting summer slip into, whatever this is? Our daughter, Zeus, our Persephone, she's gone. She's disappeared from Earth, and I can't find her. Oh, is that all? Replied Zeus. Well, I know where she is. I organised it so Brother Hades could have her as his wife. She's on the underworld throne as we speak. Queen of the dead and all that. Queen of the dead and all that. An awful silence descended upon the throne room, and then you did. You did what? Demeter's voice was barely a whisper, and turning, she stalked from the room, uttering the words, "You'll pay. It's all going to die, Zeus. No more precious mortals to worship your wretched ass. And then you, my darling, will fade into oblivion." And with that, she She leapt off the mountainside, tearing her black cloak and spreading it across the whole earth. And a new word came into being: winter. And as far as Demeter was concerned, that was all there would ever be. It's getting serious. Now, Zeus, he didn't like feeling flustered. Not at all, but he was flustered all right as the ramifications of Demeter's words quickly settled in. Hermes! I need you to go to the underworld immediately. We have got to get that girl back. So, with winged heels zinging, Hermes, messenger to all the gods, flew to the gates of Tartarus. He threw a bone to Cerberus, remember? Hades' guard dog. And then he strode into the Dark Lord's throne room where Hades and the miserable Persephone sat in an uncomfortable silence. Secretly, Hades was quite pleased to see Hermes. The sulking flower maiden hadn't exactly been sparkling company since she'd been across the river Styx. Not surprisingly. She'd barely spoken since she'd been kidnapped, and she hadn't eaten a morsel of food either. So determined was she to make it completely obvious how distraught she was at the whole situation. Game's up, Hermes said. Game's up, Hades. Zeus is over the mess Demeter's making upstairs, and he orders that you release Persephone into my immediate care. I shall return with her forthwith. Well said, Hermes. Hades, well, he glanced at his wife and he noticed, a slight flush of colour returning to her sunken cheeks. He slumped back to his throne and miserably waved his hand. Go then. Go on. Return to your mother and your sunshine and your flowers. But I ask just one thing of you, just one thing. Spend one last evening in Tartarus with me. And tomorrow, Hermes and his wings and his speed and his light, he can come back and get you. Now, it might surprise you how easily Hades gave in to Zeus's command to return the beloved Persephone, but he had a trick, a nasty trick up his gloomy black sleeve. And that evening, knocking gently on Persephone's chamber, he called out, my darling Persephone, you have brought nothing but solace to my miserable existence while you have been here. So I have brought you a delicious fruit. Will you share it with me to show there are no hard feelings and also to give you energy for your arduous journey back to the earthly realms tomorrow? Ooh, and she opened the door a crack, and there stood Hades, holding out an obsidian platter on which lay a juicy, glistening red pomegranate. Her stomach rumbled. It had been such a long time since food had passed her lips, and so, reaching out, she took a piece of fruit and let 6 beautiful seeds slip down her throat. What the hell? Gold eyes flashing, Hermes snatched the platter from Hades and dashed it to the ground. You absolute shit, Hades. And you, Persephone, you stupid girl. Don't you know that anyone who eats food from the underworld can never, ever leave? And at this, Persephone, she crumbled to the ground, howling and wailing. Her uncontrollable grief so plain to Hades. He was now starting to feel something he'd never felt before. he was a little regretful at his underhand trickery. So it would appear that Hades, he might have been the god of the underworld, but he had a small conscience. And so it came to be that Hades relented, and he released Persephone into Hermes' care with one major proviso. Yes, she had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds, and this would mean that she had to stay in the underworld for 6 months of every year with her dark lord. But for the other 6 months, she'd be free to return to the earth and be with her mother. And as Hermes deposited Persephone back in her mother's arms on the morning of her first return, Demeter rejoiced so much that the black cloak of her despair was pulled from the earth, and the first spring began. Light started to return, the days started to lengthen, and seeds long dormant in the cold soil started to grow, and all of life came back to earth. The first autumn and the first winter were over. But Demeter, the mother of the crops and the harvest, she never got used to the descent of her daughter back into the underworld. Never. For all time she would grieve and cast her dark cloak about her and draw inwards into a time of mourning and stillness, the earth being cast into autumn and winter, and then of course to spring and summer. And so now, at Autumn Equinox, we can imagine Persephone preparing for her return to the dark realm, to a seat as queen of the underworld. And we can imagine Hades' joy at the descent, the return of his wife. And also we can imagine Demeter's deep sorrow. And if you sit quietly on an autumn evening and feel into this time, you too can experience that delicious, potent melancholy. That time to return to the dark and rest and contemplation. And you know, it is said that in time, and a long time it's been, Persephone came to rejoice in the opportunity to move into her own dark phase. Her time to rest from constant growth and movement and heat and sunshine. So may we all use this time to give thanks for our plantings and our harvests and the coming opportunity to gather into ourselves and rest. And with that, as the rain pours down, which I'm not sure if you can hear in the background, been raining the whole time I've been making this story. Autumn, as the soil moistens again and the worms start to come up. Autumn blessings to you all, and I hope your harvests will be rich and that your movement into the dark time of year will be very peaceful. The end.